Epilogue. Bella's delicate fingers curled around mine while she slept. I gently caressed the elegant digits, still unaccustomed to the feeling that came upon me when I saw my mother's ring sitting there. The joy I felt was indescribable, and if I allowed myself to selfishly admit it, I couldn't wait to make her mine in every possible way. She sighed in her slumber, perfectly at ease, and I wished I could keep her like this always. The weeks had passed in a flurry of activity, leaving Bella disconcerted as she struggled to deal with the whirlwind that was Alice. Alice was pushing forward full steam ahead with wedding plans. She did her best to subdue her excitement for Bella's sake, but there was little that could be done to quell her enthusiasm. Even Jasper was too affected by the energized mood of the house to be an effective source of calm. I tried in vain to shield Bella from the stresses of wedding details, but there was little I could do. Even in her dreams, she wasn't completely immune. Her nighttime murmurings were filled with a myriad of humiliations, tripping down the aisle, forgetting her vows, stepping on toes on the dance floor. As much as it pained me to see her so anxious, it was a far cry from where we were just a month ago. We no longer faced a vengeful vampire and a newborn army. No, our biggest worry now was whether or not her guest and mine could commingle safely. The wooden floorboards groaned as quiet footsteps approached. Long shadows crept under the door from the lighted hallway as Bella's father stood just outside. Just as he did every night before retiring, he stood just outside her door, palm flush against the worn wood, as he imagined what his life would be like without her. He would miss her smile and her quiet companionship. He would miss the scents wafting from the kitchen as she prepared dinner, and the feeling of warmth that she brought into his home. He pressed his forehead to the door, envisioning a bare room on the other side, the emptiness he would feel when she was gone from him once again. She had filled a void when she came to live with him, but the familiar ache of loneliness was beginning to reappear. My baby girl, getting married. He sighed, and his footsteps continued down the hall until they disappeared completely. I wished Bella could witness her father's sadness, to understand the emptiness he would feel when she disappeared forever, though I doubt it would deter her from her present course. It would only serve to make her final goodbye that much more painful for both of them. For his part, Charlie was beginning to accept the idea that his daughter was getting married. Initially he was furious, even more so when he discovered that Bella's mother, the one person he thought he could count on to put a damper on our impending nuptials, was elated with the news. His anger turned to disappointment, and finally shifted to quiet resolve. His begrudged blessing, however, didn't deter him from jumping to conclusions the evening Bella fell asleep at our home. She had come to our house under the guise of wedding planning with Alice, and although Alice had a brief moment with Bella, I kept her to myself for the remainder of the evening. She was so content in my arms, and my mind was so preoccupied with thoughts of our future, that I lost track of the hour, and didn't wake her until the sun had already peaked over the horizon. Charlie was less than thrilled with Bella's failure to return home that night, and was fully prepared to ground her until the wedding, if not for the persuasive skills of my sister. Alice already had a better relationship with Charlie than I could ever hope to have, and it took very little effort on her part to convince Charlie that it had all been an innocent mistake. If only he knew how innocent our interludes really were. He was still fully expecting us to announce an accidental pregnancy. To my disappointment, he would be waiting a very long time to hear that news. "Jacob," Bella murmured before nuzzling her face into the crook of my arm. She had been saying his name in her sleep more and more frequently since the night she cried in my arms. She wouldn't talk about him when she was awake, but it was clear that he was on her mind. As far as I knew, they hadn't spoken since she visited him after the battle. Both of their hearts had been broken that day, and I expected it would be some time before they could heal. When Alice presented Bella with the guest list, Bella utilized her veto power and crossed Jacob's name off, insisting that he wouldn't come. She had been adamant about not inviting him, but I could see in her eyes that she hated the fact that she wouldn't be able to share her special day with her best friend. She would never openly admit it, but her nightly soliloquy gave away her true feelings. "Jacob, please," she whispered again. It broke my heart to see her in such distress over her friend. I bit the inside of my cheek, struggling with the idea that was beginning to take root in my mind. She may be upset with me, but she would be more upset with herself if I didn't intervene. Bella was too stubborn to change her mind, but I knew she would later on regret it if Jacob wasn't there, if she didn't get a chance to say goodbye. I gently eased myself off the bed and leaned down, pressing my lips to her forehead, before leaping from the open window to the ground below. When I arrived back at the house, Alice and Esme were sitting at the dining-room table, surrounded by stacks of heavy ivory paper adorned with elegant script. They were chattering happily as Alice placed the invitations into the envelopes, and Esme addressed them in graceful calligraphy. Esme looked up and smiled as I entered the room, but Alice scowled as she looked up from her work. "I know what you're planning," she accused, narrowing her eyes at me. Esme turned to Alice and looked back at me, confusion altering her expression. "Edward?" she asked. "You're going to get me into trouble," Alice murmured. "I'll take full responsibility," I promised. "Please, Alice, it's important." "Will one of you please explain to me what's going on?" Esme exclaimed, throwing her hand in the air. "Edward is going to invite Jacob," Alice hissed. "Edward," Esme reproved. "Bella specifically said—" "I know what she said," I cut her off. "But she's making a mistake. Bella will regret not having a chance to see him one last time, to say goodbye. If he decides not to come, that's on his conscience. But I can't allow her to lament what could have been if she had acted differently." They exchanged glances, and Alice pursed her lips as she bowed her head and nodded. She passed a single sheet of stationery across the table. I stared at the blank page, knowing that Jacob deserved some explanation, but unsure of what I could say. "Speak from the heart, Edward," Alice thought. I nodded, picked up the piece of paper, and began climbing the stairs to my room. Once in the solitude of my own room, I put on some music to calm my nerves, and sat at my desk, pen at the ready. My eyes were fixed on the empty page. My pen hovered over the paper, eager to transcribe my thoughts, but I was unable to form them into words. What could I say? I was most certainly the last person Jacob wanted to hear from. After all, it was I who stole away the heart of the woman he loved. But I felt the need to speak on Bella's behalf, to at least make some concerted effort towards peace. I closed my eyes, the melodic notes of Chopin's Nocturne washing over me, as I placed myself in Jacob's shoes. I tried to envision his reaction to my letter, and the invitation itself. The announcement of our wedding would be tantamount to pouring salt on his already painful wounds. More than anything else, Bella didn't want to hurt him any more than she already had, which was the reasoning she gave for leaving his name off the guest list to begin with. I imagined how I would feel if the roles had been reversed, if Jacob had managed to win her heart, and it was I who had been left behind. I could only imagine the pain I would feel, but if I truly loved her, as Jacob claimed to, I would want her to be happy above all else, and if she still desired my friendship, who was I to deny her that? I would have wanted the opportunity to wish her my best, and to tell her goodbye. As much as Bella wanted to shield him from any more pain, it was not fair to Jacob that she not at least offer him the choice. Tap, tap, tap. My thoughts were disrupted by the rapping on the door, and I turned to see Emmett leaning against the doorway with his arms crossed. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, as he strode into the room and plopped himself down on my couch, leaning back with his arms folded behind his head. "Since you're Bella-less at the moment, I thought it would be a good time to talk about your bachelor party," he grinned. I rolled my eyes and stifled a groan. "Now is not the best time. Besides, we have nearly 6 weeks until the wedding. You can never start planning too early. It's your bachelor party, man, and it's long overdue." I know, I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "We can discuss it later, but right now I'm in the middle of something." "What you up to?" he asked, sitting up and gesturing to the still blank page in front of me. "I'm writing a letter," I murmured. "A letter? To who?" "Jacob," I answered. He arched an eyebrow. "Wolf boy, why on earth would you be writing a letter to him? Did you forget that he spent the last 7 months trying to steal your girl?" I nodded. He smirked, a mischievous gleam in his eye. "Okay, here's a letter for you. Dear Mutt, I win. Sincerely, Emmett." Okay, he chuckled, holding up his palms in surrender. "It was just a suggestion. If you want to write him a letter, then by all means." "Well, I'm so glad I have your approval," I replied, my words dripping with sarcasm. He shook his head and laughed. "Strange. Well, then I'll leave you to it." He stood and began walking toward the door. "But we will talk about that bachelor party, soon." I waved him off and focused my attention back on the letter. Thanks to Emmett's distraction, I was still at a loss for words. What could I say to Jacob? If I were him, what would I want to hear, or would I prefer the silence? I put my pen to the paper and closed my eyes. Alice had told me to speak from the heart, and that's what I would do. I let my arm become an extension of my heart, a harbinger of my emotions. I could feel the flow of ink through the pen as it left its trail on the stiff parchment, etching my true sentiments in a very tangible way. The pen stopped its movement just as the soothing classical piece ended. I opened my eyes and read the words. Jacob, I'm breaking the rules by sending you this. She was afraid of hurting you, and she didn't want to make you feel obligated in any way, but I know that, if things had gone the other way, I would have wanted the choice. I promise I will take care of her, Jacob. Thank you. For her, for everything. Edward. I leaned back in my chair and reread the letter. No matter what I said, it would offer little consolation to Jacob for the loss he suffered on my behalf, but it was all I could give. I could only hope that he would believe me when I said that I was truly thankful to him. If it weren't for Jacob, Bella might not even— I shook the thought from my head. I read and reread the letter a dozen times, wondering how Jacob would react, or if he would even read it. Perhaps he would take one look at the invitation and toss it away. That was his choice. At least for my part, I could feel good knowing that he had the choice, that he had been given the option. My conscience would be clear, and so would Bella's. The invitation and letter would be more meaningful if they could be delivered by hand. The fleeting thought of delivering the message in person flew through my mind, but quickly exited as I realized the temporary truce was no longer in effect. Carlyle had made his last house call to check on Jacob's progress, and upon the news of his full recovery, Sam reinstated the treaty. The news wasn't surprising, as we had fully expected the truce with the wolves to be provisional, but I could hear the disappointment in Carlyle's thoughts. I folded the page, my words concealed within as I creased the center, so my note wouldn't be missed among the pages of wedding information. I wrote Jacob's name on the back in bold letters. I laid my pen down and passed the note from hand to hand, struggling to determine if I was doing the right thing. Would Bella be upset with me? Would Jacob be upset with her? My fingers drummed nervously against the paper as I descended the stairs. Alice arched an eyebrow as I sat opposite her and slid the note across the table. I could hear Esme in the next room, chatting with Carlyle about her most recent call from Renee. Alice's small hand grasped the note and inserted it into an envelope that had already been addressed to the Blacks.
Charlie would have been upset if his best friend wasn't invited to his only daughter's wedding, she offered.
Will he—
I don't know.
She shook her head.
I can't see him, remember?
She pressed her index finger to her temple. Of course she couldn't see how Jacob would react. I just wish—
She will understand,
Alice murmured. Will she?
Of course.
She gave me a half smile.
She won't admit it, but she wants him there. She may be upset at first, but she will understand.
But what if— I stammered. What if he decides not to come? Won't that make it worse? Alice tugged her bottom lip between her teeth as she thought.
Wouldn't you be upset if your best friend refused to come to your wedding?
I was marrying my best friend, but I could understand how Bella would feel. I would have been devastated if Alice or Carlyle had refused to be a part of my special day. But what could I do to lessen the pain? Perhaps if another friend, some other member of the pack, came in Jacob's stead, it would help to diminish the hurt she would feel if Jacob didn't come.
That's a good idea,
Alice offered, already addressing another envelope as the decision formed in my mind.
Seth will come,
she nodded. He's a good kid, I smiled. Seth, more than any other member of the pack, seemed to be willing to accept us for who we are, rather than being blinded by what we are. Perhaps he was naive, but it was encouraging to know that we had earned the trust of at least one Quileute, and maybe, just maybe, if another pack member was in attendance, it would encourage Jacob to show up, knowing that he would have a friend there to lean on. I ran my fingers through my hair, staring at the stacks of envelopes lining the center of the table. I wondered how many would come, how many invitations were being sent out of obligation or courtesy. I certainly hoped that—
I have to send one to them,
Alice interrupted my train of thought.
I'm certain they won't come, but it's important to show them that we're moving forward with the plan.
I nodded in silent thanks, relieved that the invitation addressed to Voltura would surely be declined. I prayed that the invitation alone would be enough to delay any further inquiry from Caius. No matter what promises I made to Bella regarding her mortality, I never promised to give up hope that she would change her mind. What about the other invitations? How many were going to humans, and how many were not? I wondered how concerned Bella would be about the possibility of other vampires coming to Forks. Admittedly, I was a little concerned about the Denali clan myself. After their refusal to help us with the newborns, I had nearly told Alice to strike their names off the guest list, but Esme wouldn't hear of it. I wondered how Bella would feel about meeting Tanya. I hoped that she wouldn't be intimidated. I cringed, remembering how Tanya had acted upon our last meeting. Even in my despair, she still had no qualms about making her intentions toward me known.
"Will you stop worrying about that?"
Alice exclaimed.
"They're invited. We've already discussed this."
I rose from my chair. I know, but can you blame me? If Rosalie hadn't filled her head with—
"Filled her head with what?"
Rosalie asked as she stepped up behind me. Alice rolled her eyes.
"You told Bella about Tanya, so naturally Edward's worried about how she'll feel when they meet at the wedding."
Rosalie tapped her chin, an evil glint in her eye.
"Worried about a potential catfight? Is Bella a little jealous?"
"She has no need to be," I said firmly.
"Exactly,"
Alice smiled.
"Then there's no reason to rethink their invitation."
Rosalie arched an eyebrow as Alice crossed her arms and leaned back with a satisfied grin on her face. I should know better than to dwell on these things in the same room with Alice. At the slightest manifestation of an idea or conclusion, she would see the result of that errant thought, regardless of how seriously considered it was. "I'm going back to Bella," I sighed, having no desire to endure an inquisition by my sisters. I turned to leave, blocking out the thoughts that followed me. I broke into a sprint as my feet stepped outside the doorway, eager to escape my family, and even more eager to return to Bella. My task was nearly complete. The only thing remaining was the one thing I dreaded most. I had to tell Bella. She was still fast asleep when I climbed through her bedroom window. Her sleep had not been peaceful, as evident by the way her legs tangled up in the sheets. I unwound the constricting fabric and let it flutter down over her. I climbed into the bed, and she eased back into me, sighing as my arms wrapped around her. Everything felt right when I had Bella in my arms. It didn't matter what concerns were on my mind, or what task lay ahead. All that mattered was the connection we shared, and the steady hum of electricity that flowed between us. Would that surreal sensation exist after her change, or would it increase in intensity? I began to imagine what life would be like when Bella became one of us. As much as I wanted more for her, I was eager to see the change that would take place. I wanted to be there for every new experience, to see her face light up with each new discovery as she soaked up the world with heightened senses. Would I still feel the same need to protect her when she was much less fragile, or would that sense be heightened as well? But more than her evolution, physically and otherwise, the one question I wanted to know above all others was how the change would affect her silent mind. Would the effects of the venom dissolve whatever blocks were erected in her consciousness? Would I finally be able to hear her thoughts, to know her hopes and dreams, to understand her on a deeper level than I ever imagined I could? I closed my eyes, trying to imagine what that would feel like, to experience the complexity and beauty of her mind, to be an observer of her thoughts rather than merely reacting to her spoken words. But then, even as greedy as I was to have the opportunity to see into her mind, there was still a part of me that hoped that part of her would not change. If it did, it would only make her vulnerable to the powers of vampires like Aro and Jane. I would eagerly sacrifice any pleasure I would feel if it meant keeping her safe. I wrapped my arms more tightly around her, trying instead to envision what our life would be like if she postponed her change. If our enrollment in Dartmouth weren't merely a clever ruse to disguise the true nature of our new life together. I could see Bella in our new house, helping me to make it a home. I could see her blossoming in the educational environment that Dartmouth offered. I could see her growing, maturing, becoming the woman she was destined to be. I nuzzled my face into her hair, pressing a light kiss on the back of her neck. How I wished my hopes for her would come true. I reached for her hand, wrapping it in mine, once again committing to memory the softness of her touch, the warmth of her skin. The diamond sparkled in the moonlight as I absently spun the ring on her finger. It didn't matter how much she changed, because she would always be Bella, perfectly imperfect, utterly amazing, and by some miracle, completely mine.